Canada's a very complex country to govern. It's a diverse country, it's broad geographically.
How do you balance holding up values, but also maybe being a team player?
You have to put the interests of party aside and make decisions that you feel are in the best interests of those you represent, because at the end of the day, that's who puts me here. Ben Carr, Member of Parliament for Winnipeg South Centre.
Ben, I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
There's a lot happening around the world. What is your political hot take in this moment?
I think the biggest thing right now would have to be the conflict in the Middle East and the way that that is expanding within the geopolitical region, and then the impact that it's having domestically on economies around the world. So we're living in a very divisive time, in a very confrontational time. There are hostilities everywhere. There's, I think, a real sense of instability right now. And that's why it's so important that governments like ours are undertaking the types of initiatives that we are in order to bring some stability, some calm, and some predictability to the future for Canadians.
Very well said. And I think that uncertainty, and that's a big theme when I speak with economists, is just derailed a lot with regards to investing, people wanting to hire. But I want to ask you, you work on the Industry and Technology Committee. What is some big things that you're exciting to be working on and seeing in the studies on that committee?
So we just finished two. One was on productivity and the other was on Canada's defense industrial strategy. And we just wrapped up that study around the time the government announced its policy in relation to the DIS, as we call it. Those were very interesting. A couple of areas that I personally had not spent a lot of time talking about. So hearing from witnesses and experts in given fields is always, I think, part of the privilege of being a member of Parliament and having the opportunity to sit on committee. We've just started one a couple of days ago on AI and the impacts of AI on industry and manufacturing, and also just broadly speaking, the disruption that it's inevitably going to bring and that it's already brought to our societies as a whole. That's particularly interesting. And then we've got another one happening right now on EVs. We spent a couple of meetings talking about the auto sector, changes to the auto sector that are happening by virtue of decisions that the government's had to undertake because of tariffs from the United States primarily. And all of that is diverse and it's broad and it captures things that matter to Canadians, but that matter to Canadians for different reasons from different parts of the country. And to me, that's very exciting just personally to be able to develop a deeper understanding of the fabric of the nation.
And coming from a perspective of the prairies, what do you think you bring to the table when it comes to that voice of representation? Because cabinet is supposed to have that regional representation. So why do you think it is important?
Well, I think that Canada is a very complex country to govern. It's a diverse country. It's broad geographically. We have people from all different walks of life that make up our population. And as such, it's important that those identities, those perspectives, those sets of cultural experiences and historical roots are captured in the process of governing the country. I'm often asked by people what the part of the job I like the most is. And one of the things I answer with is the fact that I'm one of 343 people representing about 100,000 people each in a little section of the country that come together to advance the interests of those people that they represent. So for me, I always have to have an eye on Winnipeg South Centre, the riding that I'm the Member of Parliament for, but I also have the privilege of being a Member of Parliament from the province of Manitoba, and I chair the Prairie North Caucus. So that means that I also have responsibilities within the government to make sure that I am helping the Prime Minister understand, not just from Manitoba, but Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the territories, of course, inclusive of Manitoba, what's going on there, and ensuring that the voices of our communities are heard and well understood. It's nice because the Prime Minister grew up, as you know, in Edmonton and understands Western Canada very well. So when I talk to him about the different things that are going on in our region, they're not foreign to him. He's able to connect to it on an emotional level because it's tied to a key part of his identity. And for me, that's been a really welcoming experience.
Do you think because of that connection, it helps shape the policy to look at Canada a bit more broadly. You mentioned it's very complex, very diverse, but we have seen historically that government policies tend to favor Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. So yeah, how do you think Prairies fits into that conversation, having a prime minister from the Prairies?
It absolutely makes a difference. I've had many conversations with the prime minister about a given set of issues that are specific to the Prairies that for somebody not from the region would have a difficult time understanding at first without being able to delve into it more deeply. Now, the Prime Minister is a pretty quick study, but he's a quick study who also happens to come from the Prairie provinces. So it does make a big difference. He understands the importance of the agricultural sector, of the natural resources sector, of a variety of the different things that make up the economic engine of the Prairies. And in addition to that, he understands diaspora communities that have settled in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. He understands the way that the country developed, the historical roots in the northern part of this country where he was born. As it pertains to Indigenous communities. So I think it's a tremendous asset for us as a government, and particularly for us as a Prairie North Caucus, to have a leader that understands fundamentally who we are and where we come from.
And, on that point, there is this rise of separatist sentiment that we're hearing from the Prairies. Alberta seems to be the loudest, but, not uncommon that we've been hearing some quiet whispers around that in Saskatchewan. How do you think Canadians in those areas can feel heard again? Because I feel like that seems to be a sentiment, at least from what I can see. I'm not from the Prairies. I've grown up in the Greater Toronto area, but I'm just curious, how can people be heard?
Well, I think the way that people are heard is by receiving the opportunity to be heard. In other words, you've got to go talk to people, and you have to show people that you have a willingness to hear them and to understand, and then you have to act on those things. I don't believe that there has been a Liberal Prime Minister, maybe ever, who has understood the West as well as Prime Minister Carney does. And I think that Albertans and Saskatchewanians and Manitobans are recognizing that. I'm always one to be a little bit skeptical of what the polls say, but they do tend to sometimes tell you a little bit of a story. And that story is certainly indicating that he and our message as a government is resonating in a part of the country where typically our party has not found support before. That tells me that people are seeing that he is interested, he is concerned, he is acting on the things that he believes are necessary in order to bring prosperity and a degree of confidence back for certain sections of the country and the federal government. And I think that this is being well received in Alberta. Now, the question of separation, I think, is a little bit of a different issue. I think that there are some for whom separation is what they believe is in the best interests of the future of Alberta. I think that's a small minority of people who may never be swayed by any decision that the federal government makes. But it certainly seems clear to me that for the first time in perhaps a number of years, there is a feeling of rejuvenation so far as the role of Western Canada plays in the country.
Very well said. And I appreciate helping us capture that a little bit. But, I want to talk about how you're here today as an MP. You've grown up in the political space. Your dad was a former MLA cabinet minister. What was it like growing up in a political family?
Yeah. Well, I joke because I was born in 1986. In 1986, my dad ran against Gary Filmon, who was the leader of the Conservative Party in Manitoba and was subsequently premier for a number of years. I was in the womb at that time. And so I was literally knocking on doors, or at least part of somebody knocking on doors when I was in my infancy. And so I grew up around it. I would pick up the phone and it would be Lloyd Axworthy or Reg Alcock asking if my dad was home. I was very privileged to grow up in an environment where politics was discussed at the table. It was encouraged. It was a part of who we were. And I had access to people that I could ask questions of. And my curiosity could be fed by virtue of the fact that I was growing up in that environment. So it had a profound impact on me, certainly.
Did you ever think you were going to run one day?
It's funny you ask that because I was a French immersion student from K to 12, and you give something called your concours d'art oratoire. So this is the French speech that you have to give when you're in elementary school. And in grade 6, in my speech, I said, "One day I will be the member of parliament for Winnipeg South Centre." So that tells you a couple of things, probably that I wasn't a cool 12-year-old, but also that I was thinking about the things that were of interest to me. And I understood at some innate level, even back then, that this was an area that I thought could potentially be a part of my future.
Tip my hat off to you, because I said I wanted to be a farmer. I somehow got into this political space. But, being able to see at the kitchen table what politics look like, and now that you've stepped into this role, was it what you had imagined? Like, did you feel like you were a bit prepared, or has this been something completely different?
Well, yes and no. So not only was I prepared to some degree, again, by virtue of the fact that I grew up in this political environment, I'd also been a political staffer for a number of years. So in fact, I was the Director of Parliamentary Affairs for Mélanie Joly when she was the Heritage Minister from 2016 to 18. That experience was just kind of the next step in my evolution of understanding how government functioned. And part of being a Director of Parliamentary Affairs is that you have exposure to the way that the public service operates, which is something I don't think most Canadians understand or appreciate in terms of the way that the government is a function of both what we see in the House of Commons and the Senate, but also the way that it is interwoven with the public service. That was very helpful for me in terms of helping develop my understanding. But there's no substitute for experience. So when you get here, it's very different. And there were a number of pretty major issues that were occurring at the time that I was first elected. A war in the Middle East broke out, and there were some pretty intense discussions about what the future of my party looked like.
Yeah.
And in addition to just being a new member of parliament, figuring out how to operate on the Hill from that perspective, how to engage with your constituents, set up a team, run the team, take in all of the different information that you get on a daily basis about this issue and that issue, things that you're usually not an expert on, so you really need to dedicate time to understanding more deeply. All of that's happening at once. So there are certainly degrees of dizziness, if I could put it that way, that you kind of find yourself feeling over time. What I would say today is that, kind of like a sports analogy, when people say of someone who's starting to turn into a little bit of a veteran, they say, the game is slowing down for them. It's not that the game itself has become any slower paced. It's as fast or perhaps even faster than it was. But the way that you perceive that speed slows down because of your experience. And that's kind of where I feel I'm getting right now.
And, as we're just wrapping up, how do you balance holding up values, but also maybe being a team player? Because politics, there's an element of being a team player. The Liberal Party does have a bit of a history of being a brokerage party. And I asked this question because when you first came in, you were one of the first Manitoban MPs to call for Justin Trudeau's resignation. So I'm just curious if you can walk us through a little bit of that.
Well, that's kind of a two-part question. I mean, one part of that is, how do you balance values? I don't think I've ever taken a decision where I felt I have fallen back on my values. There are decisions that the government had taken in the past, or maybe certain policies that I would not necessarily say, had I been the one drafting them, I would have pursued with 100% of the same direction that has been decided. But that's a very different thing from your values. Values are broad, and you can play within the sandbox of values in a variety of different ways. I would never undertake to vote on something that I felt challenged my values. When it came to Prime Minister Trudeau, for whom I have a great deal of respect and I had a very warm relationship, it was about a belief that the country was facing a moment that required a change. And my constituents were consistently communicating to me that they felt that change was necessary. And the place that they felt it needed to be reflected was in the leadership of my party. And that was a moment where I had to very deeply reflect over a pretty long period of time, not a decision that was made overnight, consulting with people I talked to, analyzing and reflecting on what I was hearing at the door, the emails I was receiving, the phone calls I was having with constituents, and ultimately having to decide what I felt my small role was in ensuring that I was representing the people of Winnipeg South Centre and their interests in a way that aligned with what I believed to be my responsibilities as a member of Parliament. And ultimately, I concluded that that was a moment where I had to lend my voice to through a very, very difficult thing. So looking back on it, I think it was the right decision. And I think the result has allowed us to grow as a party and allowed the country to grow and evolve. I think it's pretty hard to deny that that has been a consequence of that very difficult period. But that doesn't take away from Prime Minister Trudeau, in my mind, and many of the things I believe he did to advance the interests of the country. So very difficult moment for me personally, professionally, for us as a party. But those are times when you have to put the interests of party aside and make decisions that you feel are in the best interest of those you represent. Because at the end of the day, that's why I'm here and that's who puts me here.
Very well said. And I respect that. And I think we need to see a little bit of, I don't want to say assertiveness, but at the end of the day, it is the constituents who vote you in. I think there's a saying in Canada, we vote out governments, we don't vote in governments. So I think that's really noble of you to be able to put all of that into context and make that very difficult decision publicly. And, there's so many layers to that being a politician. But my very last question to you is, can you finish the sentence for me? The future of Canada is?
Full of opportunity.
I love that. And any last words you want to share with the listeners?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to sit down. I think it's really important that we have people who are interested in telling real stories from Parliament, bringing the voices of the folks that represent Canadians to Canadians, and creating a space where there's open dialogue that has substance and depth. I think there's too much in our society today that relies on the 30-second clip or on the short-sighted scoring of a political point of one kind or another. And it's this type of dialogue that is meaningful and thoughtful that allows for the open space that we need to better understand each other. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. And I'm glad that you're seeing that too, because that was my whole inspiration for doing the podcast is I think democracy moves when people talk. Like it's dialogue. We can sit here and disagree about different things, but we can have a conversation about it and help deconstruct politics and understand government. And why I'm doing this too and sitting down with folks like yourself is I want to humanize politics, because I think politics has become a dirty, polarizing word, and it shouldn't. Let's keep that dialogue open rather than, to your point, the 30-second clips that push us in these echo chambers. So really appreciate it and really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.